Alright, today we're going to go over the 1.8 homework. It's on page 62 through 64. It's 1, 2, 4 through 72 multiples of 4. So that's 4, 12, 16, 4, 8, 12, 16, so forth. Alright, this entire section is going to focus on the quadratic formula. So the first thing you got to see is you have to see ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. So most importantly, you have to focus on that equal to 0. If you don't see equal to 0, you can't use it. Once you see equal to 0, you find a, b, and c. Remember, a is always in front of the x squared, b is always the number in front of x, and c is always the number that's not with anything. So a, b, and c are always just numbers, right? And then you're going to plug it into this formula right here. So that's the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Remember, make sure there are parentheses, so you use your parentheses for all the letters. In order to reduce calculator mistakes. Some people are making calculator mistakes because they're forgetting to putting a negative number inside the parentheses. So my best recommendation for that is that's the best way to fix it. One, you can use the discriminant of a quadratic equation to determine the equation's number and type of solutions. So the discriminant tells us the number of solutions and the type of those solutions. Right. Number two, give an example when you get to use this. H equals negative 16t squared plus v sub 0 times t plus h sub 0. Remember, this is used whenever you are giving force. So, bumping a volleyball into the air. That's going to give it a positive velocity. It's going to make it hang in the air longer. All right. So bumping a volleyball into the air is something that would require the velocity. If you just dropped a volleyball from somewhere, you would not need the v sub 0 part of that formula. All right, tip for two. All right, 4, it's already set equal to 0, so the first thing to do is I find a, b, and c. So a is 1, b is negative 6, c is negative 7. Now I'm going to plug into the formula. So I have x equals the opposite of b. So instead of b, I wrote an empty set of parentheses, plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac. Notice once again, whenever I said a letter, I just wrote an empty set of parentheses, and then all over 2a. Well, a is 1, so I put a next to the 2 and next to the 4. Put negative 6 here, and I put negative 7 right here. And it's a plus 7 right here. I made a little mistake. So that makes that a little bit different. Alright, so now I'm just going to simplify. So x equals the opposite of a negative is positive. So it's positive 6 plus or minus. I'm going to put this all in my calculator and inside the radical. So without the radical, I'm going to put negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 7 in the calculator with the parentheses. I get 8. Or it's 36 minus 28 if you don't know why. All over 2. Now, this is pretty close to being done, except you just have to break down the radical. 8 is not perfect, but 4 times 2 is 8. And 4 is a perfect number. So remember, I had to find a perfect number that goes into 8. 4 does. So I finish this up. X equals 6 plus or minus. The square root of 4 is 2. So this 4 right here turned into this 2. This 2 right here stayed in jail forever. All over 2. Now finally, since this 2 can divide by both the 2 and the 6, I divide them both by 2. I end up with 3 plus or minus radical 2. If one of those, here or here, was not divisible by 2, then I couldn't divide either one of them by 2. They both have to be divisible by 2 in order to divide. And that's it for 4. Alright, 8, exact same concept. I have 5p squared minus 10p plus 24. It's already equal to 0, so I find A. A is 5. B is negative 10. C is positive 24. I use my quadratic formula, so I say x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I see a lot of people trying to divide things by 2, or 2 and a. You cannot divide by whatever 2a is until the absolute end of the problem. So, because that's like the bottom of a fraction, so you do that last. I put a next to the 2 and next to the negative 4. Put negative 10 in here and here. Notice my negative 10 is in parentheses. If you forget those parentheses, you're going to get a wrong answer, especially if you're using the calculator. So I get x equals positive 10 plus or minus the square root. I plug all this into the calculator at once. Or it's 100 minus 480, I get negative 380. Either way, you should have got negative 380 all over 10. I see a lot of people dividing 10 by 380 right now. You cannot do that because negative 380 is in jail. You cannot do any dividing with something inside the radical. So I'm going to break down negative 380. I got to remember that negative is going to turn into an I, and 380 breaks down into 4 times 95. There are other factors of 380, but 4 is a perfect square factor. That's why I care about 4. So my final answer becomes 10 plus or minus 2i, because this 4 turned into the 2, the negative turned into the I, and then 95 stays in jail forever, all over 10. Lastly, I got to check and see if anything can be divided. 10 can be divided by 10, but 2 cannot. So if both of them can't divide by 10, I can't divide by 10. So then I have to look at all three numbers, 10, 10, and 2. I say they all are divisible by 2, so I can divide all three of them by 2 to end up with 5 plus or minus I radical 95 all over 5. That's your best answer. All right, that's it for 8. All right, 12. Exact same concept as 4 and 8. Step 1, find A. A is 2. B is negative 16. C is 50. Now, I'm going to use my quadratic formula. Once again, I write it exactly as I've said every time, the opposite of B. But this time instead of B, I'm going to write an empty set of parentheses. So the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So remember that all of that is over 2A. So I put 2 next to the 2 and 2 next to the negative 4. Negative 16 here, negative 16 here, and 50 there. So outside the radical becomes positive 16 because a negative and a negative, plus or minus the square root. Negative 16 squared minus 4 times 2 times 50 is negative 144. Or if you didn't know that, the reason it's a negative 144 is negative 16 squared is 256. 256 minus 400 is negative 144. All over 4. Now remember, the negative is going to turn into I, so that's right away I know I'm going to have an I. And then 144 is perfect, so the square root of 144 is just 12. See how the radical disappeared? A lot of people are making a mistake in putting radical 12 there. Don't put radical 12 there. The radical disappears because it's perfect. Now, since both 12 and 16 can be divided by 4, I do finish this off and say 4 plus or minus 3i. And that's it for 12. Alright, so 16 does not equal 0, so I can't find A, B, and C yet. So the first thing I have to do is make it equal to 0. That's why I add 3y squared to both sides. Remember, 3y squared is not a like term. So the left side becomes 0, and I have to rewrite the right side as 3y squared plus 6y minus 10. Now remember, order doesn't matter. I mean, you should always put the y squared first, then the y, then the number. But if you didn't write it in that order, A is always going to be 3. Even if I change the order the way I write this, A is always next to the y squared. So my A is 3, my B is positive 6, my C is negative 10. So I go to my quadratic formula. I say x equals the opposite of B plus or minus the square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So I plug in A goes next to the 4 and the 2. B goes here in 6. and 6 goes there, and then negative 10 right there. Outside the radical, I get x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of, I plug in all my calculator, I get I get positive 156, or I get 36 minus 4 times 3 times negative 10 is plus 120, so it's 36 plus 120, which is 56 all over 6. I break down 156 into 4 times 39. Now, 156 has other factors, but 4 is perfect. That's why I care about 4. So my final answer is x equals negative 6 plus or minus. The 4 turns into 2. So that 4 turned into 2. Square root of 39 all over 6. Once again, 6 cannot divide by 2. Alright? So that doesn't matter that 6 can divide by 6. So I'm just going to look at all three of these, 6, 2, and 6, and say all three of them can be divided by 2. So I'm going to say negative 3 plus or minus radical 39 all over 2. And that's your best answer. This answer right here is pretty close. If you got that far, you'd probably you maybe would lose a half point if it was on a quiz. But that would be pretty good work. Alright, 20 is very similar to 16 where it is not equal to 0. So the first thing I do is pick a side to make it equal 0. I'm going to make this left side equal 0. So I'm going to minus 6 from both sides. Notice 15 and minus 6 are like terms. I'm going to add 2t squared to both sides. Notice 2t squared is not like terms with anything. Alright? So the left side became 0. The right side became 2t squared because it didn't have any like terms. Plus 9t. And then 15 minus 6 is 9. So now I have an a that is 2. A b that is 9. And a c that is 9. And I go through and use this formula. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I put 2 next to the 4 and the 2, 9 in for b, 9 in for c. So I get x equals negative 9 plus or minus. I have 81 minus 4 times 2, which is 8 times 9, 72. 81 minus 72 is the square root of 9 all over 4. Now, since 9 is perfect, I say x equals negative 9 plus or minus 3 all over 4. Since the radical is gone, I actually have to write this as two answers. I have to say x equals negative 9 plus 3 over 4, which is negative 12 over, negative 6 over 4. So I get x equals negative 3 halves. That's my first answer. Now I have to do negative 9 minus 3 over 4. I get negative 12 over 4. So I get x equals negative 3 as my second answer. And that's it. That actually means this was factorable. So if you wanted to factor that one to check, you could have. Alright, once again, this is not equal 0. So I have to make it equal 0 by subtracting 3m from both sides. I'm going to get m squared plus 2m minus 99 equals 0. So now I have a equals 1, b equals 2, c equals negative 99. Plug into my formula. X equals the opposite of b, so the opposite of empty parentheses, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So I get 2 for b, 1 for a, and negative 99 for c. I get x equals negative 2 plus or minus. When I plug that in, I get 4 plus 396. So I get the square root of 400 all over 2. I get x equals negative 2 plus or minus 20 because 400 is perfect all over 2. So I have to do negative 2 plus 20, which is negative 18 over 2. So I get x equals positive 9. Negative 2 minus 20 is negative 22 over 2. I get x equals negative 11. So I had x equals negative 2 plus 20 over 2, which turned into 9. I got x equals, I had negative 2 minus 20 all over 2, turned into negative 11. Now they wanted you to check your work by factoring, or do it in a different method. I'm going to factor this one. So because I already set it equal to 0, I'm just going to break it down and see if I get the same answers. M and M. Positive 11 and negative 9 give me the 2 in the middle. So I can say this is M plus 11. M minus 9 equals 0. That means M plus 11 equals 0. Or M minus 9 equals 0. So M equals negative 11. Or M equals 9. Just like what we got there. So it both works. But those are our answers. And that's it for 24. Alright, once again, this is not equal to 0. So I have to minus 5 from both sides to make it equal 0. I get 45x squared plus 57x minus 4 equals 0. So my A is 45, my B is 57, my C is negative 4. I plug it in. X equals the opposite of B plus or minus the square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So A is 45, B is 57, and C is negative 4. So I get X equals negative 57 plus or minus the square root. When I plug all that in, I get 3,969 all over 90. What I find out is that's perfect. So I get X equals negative 57 plus or minus 63 all over 90. When I break that down, I get X equals negative 1 1/3. When I do negative 57 minus 63 over 90, I get X equals 1/15 when I do negative 57 plus 63 over 90. And those are my two answers. That's it. Now remember, they did want you to do it by factoring, so I can do it the exact same way. I can start with 45x squared plus 57x minus 4 equals 0. So I could do negative 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. I'm going to say 15 and 3. So I'm going to say 15x minus 1 and then 3x plus 4 equals 0. Now, I got to see if this works. The outside gives me 60x, the inside gives me minus 3x. That does work. So then I get 15x minus 1 equals 0. So x equals 1/15, just like I got here. And then I do 3x plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4 divided by 3, I get x equals negative 4/3, just like I got over here, negative 1 1/3. So both answers worked. Alright, 32 is s squared plus 7s plus 11. They did not tell you to actually solve it. They said use the discriminant. The discriminant is a smaller version of the quadratic formula. It just gives you information. So remember, this is not a solution. This is not a solution. It's just information. So to say b squared minus 4ac. I plug it in. So this time a, since it's already equals 0, a is 1, b is 7, c is 11. I plug it in. 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times 11. I get 49 minus 44 equals 5. So this is not my solution, but it's information. It says since b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, 5 is bigger than 0, this 5 is bigger than 0, there are two real solutions. And that's it for 32. Alright, 36 is 8z minus 10 equals z squared minus 7c plus 3. I still have to set it equal to 0 even though I'm only finding the discriminant. Alright, so remember this is not a solution, this is just information. So I have to make it equal to 0. So make this side equal 0. That means I'm going to subtract 8z from both sides. I'm going to add 10. So I get z squared minus 15z plus 13. So a is 1, b is negative 15, c is 13. I'm going to plug it into my b squared minus 4ac formula. So I'm going to say negative 15 squared, which is 225, minus 4 times 1 times 13. I end up with 173. Alright, Alright, since 173 is bigger than 0, or b squared minus 4ac is bigger than 0, there are two real solutions. That's it. 40, we have 16t squared minus 7t equals 17t minus 9. I can solve this however I want. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set it equal to 0. So then if I want to use the quadratic formula, I can. I get 16t squared minus 24t plus 9. So I subtracted the 17 over, I added the 9 over. Now, before I do the quadratic formula, I'm just going to see real quick if this is a perfect square trinomial. So I'm going to hope that the square roots work. Where I can say 4t plus 3, 4t plus 3. The outside gives me 12t, the inside gives me 12t, that gives me negative. So I want these both to be negative. So maybe I change, I'm going to make these both negative. Now, this will work, so I get to say 4t minus 3 equals 0, or 4t minus 3 equals 0. If that wasn't equal to 0, I would make those parentheses match into one parentheses squared and then use square roots. I don't have to. I get t equals 3/4. I don't have to solve it twice because they're both exactly the same. That's it for 40. So I did not have to use the quadratic formula for 40. Alright, first things first is I don't want to deal with any of these fractions, so I'm going to multiply everything by 4. So this by 4, this by 4, this by 4, this by 4. It's going to make all my fractions go away because it's the biggest denominator and it's the greatest common factor between 2 and 4, or the least common multiple. So I'm going to say multiply the 3 halves by 4 is going to be 6y squared minus 24y equals 3y minus 36. Now I'm going to move everything over. Right, I'm going to make this right side equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 3y, and then I'm going to add 36. So I'm going to get 6y squared minus 27y plus 36 equals 0. I'm going to use the quadratic formula. Say a equals 6, b equals negative 27, c equals 36. And I'm going to plug it in. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I'm going to say the negative 27 here, negative 27 here, 6 here, 6 here, 36 here. So I'm going to get x equals positive 27 plus or minus the square root. You can't see inside this radical, it says negative 27 squared minus 4 times 6, which is 6 times 36. When I plug that mess into my calculator, I get negative 135 out, all over 12. Now I know negative 135 is 4 times, I have to say 9 times 15. The negative turns into I, so I get x equals 27 plus or minus I. We'll say plus or minus 3i square root of 15 all over 12. I divide everything by 3, so my best answer is x equals 9 plus or minus I radical 15 all over 4. So that one's a little tough, but it worked out. Alright, 48 is 4.5 equals 1.5 times the quantity 3.25 minus, I changed that s to x because it's a little bit easier for you guys to see, squared. I'm going to use PEMDAS backwards. I do not have to use the quadratic formula. I'm just going to use PEMDAS backwards. Now, there are addition and subtraction inside the parentheses. That's inside the parentheses. So I have to get rid of this 1.5 first, which is multiplication. That's why I divide everything by 1.5 to start. 4.5 divided by 1.5 is 3. So I have 3.25 minus x squared. Now, how do I get rid of the exponent? I square root both sides. So I get plus or minus radical 3 equals 3.25 minus x. Good news is when I finish this, I don't have to worry about breaking down radical 3, as I can give a decimal approximation because they started with decimals in the problem. So I'm actually going to add x to both sides, or actually I'm going to subtract 3.25 from both sides. So I'm going to get negative 3.25 plus or minus radical 3 equals negative x. And then I divide everything by negative 1. So I get x equals 3.25 plus or minus radical 3. I do that in my calculator because I'm allowed to get decimal answers. I get x equals 1.52 and x equals 4.98. And that's it. Alright, 52. Since the u crosses twice, it has two real solutions, which tells me the discriminant is greater than 0 or positive. That's really it. The number of solutions will tell you about the discriminant, and that's it. Alright, 56 is back to using the discriminant. It's really easy. For part A, they said find out if it has two real solutions. So two real solutions means you have to do b squared minus 4ac. It has to be greater than 0. Well, in this problem, a is 1, b is negative 4, and c is, well, we don't know what c is, so we're just going to keep it c. So when I plug these in, I get negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times c. I actually get 16 minus 4c. So I just have to get c by itself. So I minus 16 from both sides. I get negative 4c is greater than negative 16. I divide both sides by a negative 4. Remember, when you divide by a negative, you have to flip the inequality, so I get c is less than 4. Now, when I do one real solutions, I'm just going to imagine that was an equal sign. So I have b squared minus 4ac equals 0. So that means it's going to be c equals 4. C means that everything's going to be flipped. So for a b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, or two imaginary solutions, I'm going to have c has to be greater than 4. And that's it for 56. 60 is going to be accuracy, because I don't think I've made a mistake on purpose as of yet. So 60 will be an accuracy problem. 64 is they're going to give you two answers. They're going to say x equals negative 4/3 and x equals negative 1. It's kind of like our encoding and decoding activity. So they want you to have something where c has to be 4. It's the only rule about the problem you're going to make at the end. So I'm going to work backwards. I'm going to add 4/3 to both sides and make x plus 4/3 equals 0. And make x plus 1 equals 0. Now I don't like this fraction here, so I'm going to multiply everything by 3 to get 3x plus 4 equals 0. Now I have two things without fractions equal to 0, so I'm going to put them together. Now I'm going to FOIL. I get 3x squared. The outside is 3x, the inside is 4x, so I get plus 7x plus 4 equals 0. This is in proper form, and c equals 4. It does. So that's it for 64. Alright, 68, they give you this formula. That's like from number 2, about a velocity or force to an object that's in the air. So the ending height is when it hits the ground. That's why h is 0. I don't do anything with negative 16t squared. The vertical velocity is minus 50 feet per second. That's why I put minus 50t. And the initial height is 7 feet in the air is when it's hit. Now, I have an A, which is negative 16. I have a B, which is negative 50. I have a C, which is 7. So now, I'm going to plug these into my formula. I'm going to play negative 50 here, negative 50 here, negative 16, 7, and negative 16. I plug both of these into my calculator. So I do negative 50, x equals 50 plus or minus the square root of all this stuff in the radical over negative 32. I plug in and I get two answers. I get negative 3.5 and 0.13. It's impossible to have a negative time, so that's my final answer is 0.13. 0.13 seconds. And that finishes the 1.8 homework with these ones.